Orange County Soccer Club, definitively one of the most successful clubs in the United States over the last half decade, going back a decade to when they started. It's their 10th season. Twice they've won the Western Conference regular season title, and three honest lads. Happy to welcome two very honest lads, Braeden Cloutier, Oliver Wyss. Guys, thanks for taking time.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, guys, obviously it's an unparalleled uncertainty at the club level, at the league level, at sports in general's level with the COVID-19 shutdown. Let's begin with this, and Oliver, I'll lead with you. How are you doing? What are you doing to try and get yourself through this and help the club through this?
Well, I think in these times, the most important thing is now to really take care of your community. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about our front office, I'm talking about our staff, I'm talking about our players, and we're talking about our fans, right? Really engage with them because we're all in this together. Look, as I say to everybody, soccer will come back, and I'm sure Braeden will talk a little more towards how we're preparing the team to actually be back when we're allowed to play again. But he also gives now us the chance really to connect with everybody and also work on the details of the organization that usually during a season, which we will be in full swing in now, don't always have the time. So overall, of course, we're disappointed we're not playing because we feel we have a very, very good team and a great organization and continuation of the few seasons before. But we're also preparing what holds the future, and we're very excited about that as well.
Yeah, Braeden, what's this look like for you at present?
Yeah, it looks challenging, We're just trying to be creative and keep the players as active as we can and give them, workout plans and training programs to follow. We've incorporated some video homework for them as well. But, yeah, it's obviously not ideal. It's been very difficult, but we'll get through it.
I want to dip into a wide variety of topics, and I'm glad you guys are doing well and enjoying Southern California weather. But I want to talk to you guys about the operations because you guys have run a top-notch program now going on 10 years in different ways. The youth and then the partnership you guys have with Rangers that you guys put together over the offseason. So let's kind of start with the team as a whole, sort of the mentality of it. I've talked with Braeden about it, and Oliver, I know you're involved. The roster composition in the USL is sort of a constantly evolving benchmark goalpost. In the past, we've talked about databases that the front office keeps, potential acquisitions. Oliver, what's your role in actually building a roster in the USL Championship, having been a head coach and a GM and now VP in terms of player operation?
Man, that's a lot of roles, huh? But look, the reality is backing up a little bit. For Braeden and I, this is our 6th season together at the club. We came in together, but we've also been working together for probably 15 plus years in the youth community in Southern California. So we have a very good understanding. And from day one, we said, look, we want to build an organization here where the community can be really proud of. The league has grown so much, but we also felt very strongly that we should integrating some of the most talented young players that specifically we've seen over the years in Orange County, that they should truly have a professional pathway. Well, that vision got even more enhanced, obviously, when James Keston bought the team 3 years ago, who really wants to make sure that we're building that pathway and also have these player assets that, especially in a time like now, really give a lot of value to an organization, right? So for us, I think it's all about teamwork. My part, it is leadership. Ultimately, you want to work with the best people together. I think on a technical side, from having Braeden Cloutier as our head coach, having Franz Hug as our technical director, having Peter Nugent, as our head of recruiting. We have a great staff where we all work together. Everybody has a task. And ultimately, it's not about one person. It's about the common goal that we always try to building. And I think it's worked out really, really well. So for me, my role is to guide a very talented team and make sure they have everything possible to be successful on the field.
Yeah, Braeden, as the head coach, previously an assistant with Oliver on the touchline, the last few years, you guys have this really wide net in terms of how you guys have gone about recruiting players. Tomasini Voldsing comes out of seemingly nowhere. Sean Okoli's a former league MVP. Michael Orozco is a name that I think most people who follow soccer in this country know. And then Nathan Smith and Darwin Jones and Kevin Alston. And that's a really wide net in terms of a variety of players. Describe how you go about not only getting those players to buy into Orange County, but then the characteristics that make that work for you.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, first and foremost, relationships, knowing people and knowing people. And like you said, this wide net. Been very fortunate with Peter Nugent, having connections in Europe, obviously Oliver, with Franz as well. But it's for us is to create profiles, and we've done a really good job of profiling exactly what we want from within each position, how we want to play, the structure, and obviously our principles of play. And so from there, we go out and we look at players, we recruit players, we talk to people, obviously with the agents and people that Peter knows, and we try to create these relationships. And I think we've done a really good job creating these relationships and these profiles, and then from there, talking with the players, vetting the players, getting to know them personally, and see if they fall into our category of what we want here at Orange County, and ultimately, to build this out. I think the most frustrating thing for us right now is I think that this is the third year for me being the head coach, and I think this year we finally put together from top to bottom the complete product, and it's just frustrating right now that we don't get to go out there and showcase ourselves.
Agreed. There are few teams in this league where I feel like genuinely they are building year to year. It's sometimes wholesale changes at this level. And yet, Braeden, you sort of have a group that last year kicked into high gear. I think you described it as like putting gum in the dam when we spoke about it mid-season, all the injuries and everything. But it feels like you guys take having consistency in your roster very seriously. Is that something going into the offseason we want to keep 15 guys, 10 guys? Do you just take it case by case and deal with that?
Well, I think, every year is a learning curve. We learned a lot in the last couple of years, and exactly how we want to go about, how we want to build. In the beginning when Oliver was the head coach, and, I don't think we retained probably one or two players every year. And now as the growth of the league and the evolution, and obviously with our new ownership, it's given us the opportunity to, keep a cohesive group together, and continue to build from that. Last year was a challenge, definitely in the very beginning with injuries and not getting certain players in on time. And it was just like you're plugging one hole and spring another leak. And, with different injuries and different situations that happened throughout the season, I think by the midway point, we were able to finally get things stabled and solidified. And ultimately, we went on a good run in the second half of the season.
This is my fault because when you actually made the reference on the call to that movie, I had no idea what you were talking about.
Vacation.
Yeah, right.
Vegas Vacation, yeah.
Oliver, you talk about Franz, you talk about Peter, Braeden, his staff, your own role having evolved from on the field to front office. How do you align that many different people together into one overarching goal as a franchise?
Well, I think, again, it starts absolutely on the top, right? And it goes with leadership. Everybody has to buy into it, and there's a mandate, but everybody's got to have a voice as well, too. And I think what we have done a good job, and again, when James came in, to really align everybody, what is the goal of this organization? And I think even for Braeden as a head coach, who's been an assistant, understands the league, and was ready for take on that job, to understand that, one, he has the support from ownership and for myself, obviously, to, hey, look, go out there, play the way you want to play. Let's be aggressive when we play, but also find a way to integrate young, talented players. And you know what? If they deserve to play and we create an environment where they're doing well, don't be afraid to play them. If they make a mistake, that's part of development. And there's always the fine balance between winning a championship, and let's make no mistake, we always want to win a championship, but we also want to be true to the bigger goal of the organization, and that is developing these younger players and integrating in. So the players who named like Michael Orozco, Thomas Ennewaldson, these are also great role models for our younger players to strive for, right? And for them to train, if you look at a Francis Jacobs or an Aaron Cervantes in the goal, right, for them to come in a daily routine, train with the incredible technical staff that spends a lot of time in preparing these players, but also then learn from these the senior players, is probably a very unique environment for the USL and probably all around the United States. Because I think there's too big of a gap between the top academy players, so the young players, and the first team. You see it in the MLS, it's very difficult for a young player to break in, but we have, I think, found a good balance between integrating these players and get some first-time minutes, but also create a daily environment where these players are truly getting better every single day. And we have a staff built around it that has done really, really well with them.
Yeah, that's a segue I think all three of us want to move into here. The concept of pathway to pro, right? Oftentimes we talk about that at the USL League 2 level. I think it's their motto. But Orange County SC sort of has this ethos about the club where you guys have competed on the field at extraordinarily high level, but it feels like the level of the youth you've brought in over the last, call it specifically 3 years, maybe Cervantes was the first major guy that I think people looked at and turned their head a little bit. Where does that come from? Where's the desire to do that, and what's the end game? I guess, Oliver, I'll start with you on this. Why is that ethos so central to the nature of this club?
Well, look, if you look at the history of soccer, the truly only way to ever make a real business concept out of it is by producing your own players and selling them on at the right time, right? Obviously, the American model a lot of times is about franchise value. The USL franchise have increasingly obviously gone up, which is great. But we wanted to make sure it's not just about franchise value, it's actually about developing these young players and then moving them on. So we're looking at these players as assets. And that has worked out really, really well. And we started it early. Yes, he was a little bit at risk to take this on because, as we know, it's very hard to compete. But again, it was fundamentally so important that the entire organization, meaning starting with James, into everybody in the front office, into our technical staff, is aligned and knows we do want to give these players a chance and do integrate them. When we took a little bit of leap of faith 3 years ago with Aaron, that Braeden actually coached, and you can talk a little bit more about that, in his earlier days. We're always look for mentality first and foremost, that they have certain talent, of course, otherwise we wouldn't have the conversation. But I think if a player has the mentality and has the talent, then we feel we have an organization from bottom to top that can really prepare them for the next level.
Braeden, do you sort of see the ability to not only be that selling club? I mean, I think maybe the most drastic international example, maybe an Ajax, a Barcelona, where they have an academy that is so renowned and have also succeeded at such a high level. And it's not to suggest OCSC right now is Barcelona or Ajax, but do you sort of see your role in developing that concept long term?
Absolutely. And I think that's the kind of the goal that we want in our club, to ultimately get to that level. But, for me, like Oliver mentioned, winning, there's no compromise. I mean, the ultimate goal is to win a championship. But along the way, if we can produce some of these young players and give them minutes, they have to be earned minutes. They can't just be given minutes. And then Aaron's a good example. The very first year Aaron was here, he was 15 and he didn't play 1 minute. He didn't even sit on the bench one game. And then the next year, last year, he ended up breaking through. He had a very good preseason, and then over time, he's developed and matured. But he's a kid that I've known since he was 10 years old. And he's the exact same age as my son. And so he was playing with my son on the same team, and I saw some, attributes in him. He's very coachable and ambitious and hardworking and driven. And those are qualities I knew that we wanted to bring into Orange County. So at the time when I took over as head coach, and Oliver and James had said, this is our goal and this is our mission, I said, this is the number one player we need to bring in. And we were fortunate at that time to make it work. And we brought him in, and we sat him down and sat his parents down and explained exactly what we were going to do and how we are going to do things. And I think at that time, they were very eager and hungry, but I don't know if they can exactly see the bigger picture of what we were talking about. And now after, the third year, and this being the third year, is they see the true value in what we're trying to do and what we're trying to create here in Orange County, which is in turn giving us an opportunity to bring in more and players like Francis Jacobs, and we signed Blake Malone, and we brought Diego Lopez, who Diego is another player that I had at the same time when I had Aaron, same age, on the same team. So I was very familiar with Diego. At the same time when we brought in Aaron, we were trying to bring in Diego, but Diego opted to go to the MLS route, which we had no problem with. But fortunately for us, he's come back to Southern California, and we were able to sign him. But ultimately, I think as this grows and more players come in and we give them more minutes and they're developing and eventually we move them on, then we can become that club, like you said, like an Ajax or Barcelona in this country.
Braeden, I've spoken, Brendan Burke comes to mind out in Philadelphia with Union 2, previously Bethlehem Steel, where I discussed at length over the last few years the process of getting young players into a roster There, it's a little different. Most of the players are young. You've got Chambo and everybody else. With you, it's very much a senior-laden roster in most positions. They've played at an extremely high level. Brendan described it, Brendan rather, as a 6-month kind of, let's get them in training first, and then we're going to get them maybe a game here, get them off the bench, or every individual's different. With Aaron Cervantes, he especially interests me because he played so well at times last year. You had a goalkeeper, a veteran that you brought in, and he still earned the shirt and kept it for much of the year until Frederick Douay came in. Describe sort of the process of, okay, you're going to sit for a year, but you're going to get where you want to go, and we're going to set benchmarks that don't necessarily include you're going to play 20 games as a 17-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing is that we do have benchmarks. We have a individual development program for each one of our young players that we follow. And for somebody like Aaron, it's you give him a little bit and then you take a little bit back, and then you give him a little bit more and then you take a little bit back. And I think that's been the mold that we've created for Aaron. And this year he came into preseason. We have Frederick, and he's come in and he's trained extremely hard and played very well in preseason, and ultimately he got the shirt for the first game. But ultimately for us, every one of our players, you said we have a senior, roster with a lot of older players with a lot of experience, and those players all understand the role and responsibility when they came to this club, that we're going to give opportunities where opportunities are warranted for these young players, and we need them to back us, and we need them to support these young players and help them develop. And with the Michael Orozco, we brought in a Rob Kiernan from England, and we have Kevin Alston and Thomas Innebolts, and these guys all know the roles. And Aiden Quinn, that, we have these young players, but for the sake of just playing young players, we're not going to do that, And so every single day of practice, these guys challenge these guys. It's extremely competitive. And when the time is right and these guys get an opportunity, that these guys are going to be there to support them.
Talking here on Three Honest Lads with Braeden Cloutier and Oliver Wyss, the brain trust, part of the brain trust for Orange County SC, who over the last 3 years, top 5 in the league in points. They've won the regular season title. They've gone to a Western Conference final. So they've done so many outstanding things on the field. We're kind of in this youth aspect now because it is so much to the point of their long-term vision. Guys, I don't think we can sugarcoat it at all. The DA announced a couple weeks ago that they're going to be taking a step back from development in that format. They have gotten rid of the USSDA. U.S. Soccer pulling out allows USL Academy. MLS is reportedly contemplated sort of a Super League, ECNL. There's a lot of different ways to go about this, right? But Oliver, I'll start with you. What happens now? What's your thought now that the Development Academy is gone?
Well, look, I would say this. I always was a big believer that ultimately the professional player development, that we're looking at professional players, should be done by the professional teams and not with the youth teams. So I think for U.S. Soccer to drop the DA at this point in time, I mean, that's something that was in discussion probably for many years, and it was probably the perfect timing it was going on to make that announcement. And look, I feel very strongly about the USL role in this. I think we've proven that young players, if they're trained in a great surroundings, that they have the ability to play in a USL Championship team. But it's also very clear that you cannot play with too many young players at the same time, or you cannot compete. So that within that lies the great opportunity for the USL Academy that obviously started a year and a half ago, and with the USL Academy Cup, and I think with the talks of potentially a professional league going on. And I think that's something so important. So we need to look at this USL Academy, maybe not only as an academy team, but to really almost be the reserve of the first team, where these young, talented asset players then can play. They're training in the same structure. There's a lot of collaboration, obviously, between the first team and that team. It's integrating of coaching staff, same style of play. And I think that lies a great opportunity. Look, the MLS teams, there might be some opportunity to work with them on a professional aspect and still have relationships through your local youth clubs on the lower level, because there's absolutely no reason that as a pro club, you need to have 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-olds where you're already starting to do all the work, because let them be players, let them enjoy. But as we all know, starting age 14, I think getting the most talented players into a professional setting, if they have the mentality and the talent, is the right thing to do. The same thing we've done with Francis Jacobs that at a young age, at age 14, we've taken from a local academy, put him into the pro team with a great structure, great development plan, has gone in to play 6 months later for Glasgow Rain in the Alcos tournament, which is the most prestige tournament in the for U16s, and done really well. So that pathway works, but it only works if that talent really plays in a professional setting. And I think the pro teams need to step up and take over the full development plan for the most talented players in this country.
Braeden, what's your takeaway from the news about the DA? And I'm sure you can piggyback a bit off what Oliver has said.
No, absolutely. And I think the biggest challenge ultimately in this country is the size of our country, right? You know, if you look at the different countries in Europe, I mean, Holland, for instance, because we work with Franz, you know, I mean, you can get from top to bottom and from side to side within a few hours, right? The challenge is, you know, for us, the country's so big and different time zones and the travel, and to get the pro clubs to obviously be able to play against one another in the youth setting is where I think it ultimately needs to go. But the challenge is obviously when it becomes a financial situation, when it comes to cost of travel, and those are the different challenges that we need to be able to overcome to ultimately get to, you know, having the best compete against the best on a week-to-week basis, like everywhere else in the world. And I think, you know, Oliver and I both been around the youth game for a long time. Here in Southern California, it's been, you know, I won't say the Mecca, but I mean, it's been in a high level of youth soccer for a long time. And we used to participate in Coast Soccer League, where there was a promotion and relegation, and ultimately the demands of that was extremely high. So the players were competitive, and they knew the consequences if they ended up losing games. But at the time, it became a little bit detrimental to the actual playing, and what we wanted from the playing. And I think the scale got tilted a little bit too far to the other side, and we lost a little bit of that competitiveness. And ultimately, the cream rises to the top. The best players end up going to the pro teams, and then ultimately the pro teams go out and play a team, and they end up winning 10-0. So really, there's really no competition there. So I think ultimately, and that's the biggest challenge in this country, is to kind of bridge that gap and find the best case scenario. And, you know, I don't know, the DA started out with the best intentions, but ultimately, I don't know if it really got the best results. You know, I think, you know, U.S. soccer struggled here for the last 10 years, and with the first team obviously not qualifying, and different things that have been going on in the youth program with the revolving door of coaches and things like that. I think there's just, this is probably a good time for everybody just to take a deep breath and reassess everything and find the best pathway. And for us, I mean, obviously it gives us an opportunity that, you know, what we're wanting to do and what we want to accomplish is to bring up these young players and give them a best case scenario, like Oliver said, in a professional environment where they can train and they can work on their game and have good role models around them, and for us to continue to work with them in the video room and in the weight room and in fitness programs and just everything, so that ultimately, like Francis had an opportunity to go to Rangers and, you know, a top club around the world, and showcase himself at a very, very high level event, and he did very well. And ultimately that's, you know, for us, the goal, you know, is to hopefully by the time Francis is 18, 19 years old, he's playing in a top league somewhere.
I want to dig into Rangers more in a moment, but one or two more things here on the youth landscape. Real quick for both of you guys, the one thing you would change. This feels like an inflection point. There are a lot of different directions this could go. You know, you mentioned promotion relegation within the academy construct. That certainly exists in other countries. Solidarity payments, training compensation. There's a million things that people want or think could happen. If you could pick one change, what would it be? Braeden, in terms of the youth construct, what's the one thing you really wish they'd take away from this moment?
Well, I mean, I'll leave the business side, I mean, obviously to Oliver to answer, because I think there needs to be something like that for these youth clubs, because ultimately, you know, a lot of times, a lot of the competition within players and recruiting players is that a lot of those teams don't want to lose the best player, right? But they need to understand that the bigger goal is for the player and not for the club necessarily, you know, and these youth clubs to move them on. But for me, I think definitely some kind of promotion relegation. I mean, I think even in the professional game, and there needs to be something where there's a higher incentive and then challenge for the players in the competition. And I know you can talk to different players who play around the world, and they play in these games. I mean, we have, you know, on our staff, Richard Chaplow, who had an opportunity to play in a promotion relegation when he was moving from the championship to the Premier League, and and the value of those games and the pressure that goes with those games, and then vice versa. You know, you could be at the bottom of the table, but there's still obviously a lot of value in staying up. I think ultimately creates a competitive environment for the players that understand that, you know what, this is more than just it's life. I mean, this is the biggest challenge for them, and to develop and to become mentally tougher. And I think I saw a few different interviews with different MLS players and how MLS has even evolved, but there's still no promotion relegation. I think that for me would be the biggest thing to help, you know, when it comes to the pressure of really having to compete for the development, the next stage for these younger players.
Oliver?
Look, what I would add to this is, one, I absolutely believe that when a club develops a player, they should be financially compensated for it, right? And look, we feel even today, just because US Soccer maybe hasn't enforced as much training compensation, if we get a player from a club and we courtesy and it's common sense because you work with each other, then I think the other aspect is also the cost of youth soccer should be, it's just too much, right? For somebody to spend thousands of dollars to travel all around the United States, which was part of, you know, with the DA, for example, a lot of great showcases. I think there's still traveling involved, but I think we can localize and regionalize and get quality games in a local area a lot more. And then maybe do one finals if we need to have playoffs and finals. But I think getting the cost under control is one thing. And for two, to really protect the clubs that are developing these players and spend the time on the youth level is a necessity moving forward.
Interesting. Guys, last thing on youth, I want to get to Rangers and we'll get you out of here. LA, you talk about being a hotbed. They have amazing youth clubs. All the way into PDL, there are top-notch programs there. The Galaxy, LAFC, and you guys are there. So there's this wide swath of ability to pick your route, more so than maybe a lot of other places. That in mind, what's sort of the argument you make where this is probably the closest thing to England where you do actually have 5, 6, 7 top choices in one area? Braeden, just try and describe to me what your pitch is to a young player.
Well, definitely there's a difference between LA and Orange County. So that's number one, you know, and even San Diego. Everybody, I think, tries to blend Southern California all into one market, but there are different markets. And so that you do have an LA market, you do have an Orange County market, you do have a San Diego market. And first for us is to target our market. You know, I don't think kids from Orange County need to be traveling an hour and a half up to LA and dealing with traffic to go to training on a daily basis. You know, and for us, what we have and what we're created here in Orange County, they could stay here and play at home. So I think that's first. But at the same time, I think there's more than enough talent. There's a lot of talent here in again, I don't want to use Southern California, but there is in Southern California to go around. So, you know, and even for a kid maybe that lives up in north of LA, you know, for them to come down this way, it might become a challenge as well. But I think if they do their homework and they see exactly what we're creating here in Orange County and the opportunities that we're given for these younger players, that I think that we could be the choice for them.
And Oliver, I'm interested in, you know, so much has been made about the expense of development, and it's undoubtedly a large number the more you do. Try and quantify to some extent the investment that this organization has put behind it, the financial muscle to match the bravado of wanting to be one of the great development clubs in the U.S., North America, and maybe in the long run worldwide.
Look, we've made the commitment. We currently have 8 players under the age of 19 on our first team roster on their long-term professional contracts. So that is already the first step. So when Braeden talks about opportunity, if a player does the research now in their family and says, hey, you know what, we're going to develop these players, give them the opportunities, well, we're showing it, right? With Aaron, with Francis, with all the people we discussed earlier. So I think the players now are saying, hey, if I go the MLS route, yeah, it might be still interesting, but how many of these players are really getting the opportunity to go on to the first team and showcase themselves? And I think more importantly for us, we want to be that middle piece for these young players. We don't want to be the end piece. So for our business model, we want to move these players on. So I think the years and have to go to end up in Europe at age 18 or 19, they realize coming through our structure where we the player rights 100%, and are very much eager to move these players on, it probably creates a cleaner pathway for the player to ultimately go to this goal and play in Europe or South America, wherever that is. And so we made the commitment into the first team players contract. We're offsetting, obviously, college eligibilities, very similar to the MLS for these players to sign pro contracts with us. And we are obviously building now the youth academy aspect of it. That will be, again, a significant amount of money. But with the positive results we're seeing with Aaron and with Francis, where we already have interest, it's going to be it's a lot easier to reinvest that money into the next Aaron, the next Francis, and the next Diegos. And so I think we're in a very good position to not only build this, but to continue to show that we have a model that could potentially work for many USL franchises without having to spend ridiculous amount of money in youth development if you're willing to take the chance on these players and have a clear vision to develop them.
Oliver, I want to turn to Rangers. Over the offseason, the club consummated a relationship with Rangers, one of the most well-known clubs on the planet. Part of that was sending players there for training and even youth competition, players coming back, you guys going there, them visiting Orange County. Oliver, describe, because you've done this with Kosuke Honda's club before to an extent, probably a lesser extent, I think could be fair to say. But what's sort of the mutual benefit for both you guys when you make a relationship like this come to fruition?
Well, I think first of all, both parties have to truly, benefit from it. When we're talking about Rangers specifically, look, for the last 3-4 years, we've looked at a European partner because again, we felt very strongly that the aspirational end piece cannot be Orange County for a young player. It has to be a European club, right? Or earlier was an MLS club. So with that, we have evaluated many, many clubs, and we've had some big clubs in the World Champions League clubs that were interested. But ultimately, we wanted to find a club that was truly the essence was soccer. It was about player development. It was not about commercial activities. The commercial activities will come along once you have the players built. And truly said, Glasgow Rangers, obviously 4 or 5 years, went through a hard time as well financially, got relegated, and spent a lot of time and effort in the youth development. And we've had the chance to go over there, see it firsthand. Their staff is world-class, the setup is world-class, and the openness and the transparency they wanted to do so and really create a plan that would work for both parties was evident from the first day. And then when they came and visited us and saw the level of play, saw what we built together, and saw where we still want to go, and that we also can use their help in developing our youth structure even better, it was a match made in heaven. And after a few months of negotiation back and forth just to clear up the details, we have now a relationship with one of arguably Europe's, most historical club, and a club that we now want to expand our development with. And I think it's been great from every single aspect of it. But again, the essence is player movement, and with obviously the caveat of getting some commercial activities out of it as well.
Sure. Braeden, in terms of player movement, we saw Cammy Palmer week 1, Danny and Matthew come over as well. So a trio of Rangers players at varied stages of sort of their progression as professionals. What do you sort of see is how this has worked out thus far and sort of how you envision it going forward, including the value your players that you've had get out of being involved with Rangers, like a Francis Jacobs, who from all accounts was actually quite good in a major international tournament overseas with them.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely the opportunity for us to provide a platform for our players to go over there. They know that there's American talent here in Southern California, and they want to try to dip into that market, right? They've seen the American players going over to Germany, the Christian Pulisic's, and they want an opportunity to see if they can poach another player from here, from Southern California. And for us, it gives us an opportunity to bring some of their players over here. They had a chance to come over here and watch us play. Like Oliver said, they saw the level that we were at, and ultimately, it's the style of soccer that we're trying to play. That they could put one of their players into a professional environment, know that he's going to get trained, know that he's going to be playing a good brand of soccer that's going to hopefully, in turn, when he goes back to them, be able to put them back into the first team. I know they had some challenges when they would loan out some players to some lower league Scottish teams or even English teams, and the style didn't really suit the player. And ultimately, the player came back and he wasn't developing. He was probably regressing. Just because of the style of soccer that was being played. So for them to come over here, it's a huge compliment to us and what we're trying to do. I had a relationship with a legendary Rangers player, Richard Goff. And Goffy lives down in San Diego, and so Goffy was able to come up here, and we played together in San Jose, and he saw what we were doing, and so I think he put in a good word as well, and ultimately, it's going to go both ways. They're going to send us players. Once again, they're not guaranteed anything, and they know that. They need to experience first-team soccer, and the challenges that come with that. There's no guarantees. And then for our players to go back over there to see what it's like in that environment, because ultimately over there, especially over there, when it comes to an Old Firm game or it's life and death for those people, in the mentality of the city. We're fortunate we have Rob Kiernan and Harry Forster, both two guys that played with Rangers when they were going through that tough stage of trying to get promoted back into the Premier League in Scotland from the Championship. And those guys could tell you the challenges of just one game you lose, and you can't even go outside to go to the market the next week because they knew that the fans were going to give them a lot of stick. Over here it's a little bit different. You could have a poor game and you go outside and people pat you on the back. So we need our players to understand what the life and death type of situation is, to go over there, to train over there, to experience it. And then obviously the relationship with, like you said, with Cammie and Maddie and Danny coming over here to explain to our younger players what it's like. But for those guys to get an opportunity to see what the culture is like over here in America. I definitely, it's funny, they always talk about the sunshine. We had an opportunity to go over to Scotland, and I mean, it was actually, I think we had one day where there was a little bit of sun that broke through and it was gone, and sideways rain came in. But for those kids to come over here and experience, the weather and the conditions that we have over here, that they can train pretty much every single day, and it's going to be perfect conditions, presents its own challenges. The travel for us in our league, the altitudes that you go to, the different weather conditions, the different surfaces. Those are all challenges that they're looking forward to, trying to help them create a better mentality for their players. So it's a win-win both ways. And like Oliver said, I think for me and Oliver, it's about soccer first. It's about player development first, and and I know the same for them. And then, like you said, I mean, the commercial thing, I kind of stay out of. But it's ultimately a business, and I understand that. But for us, to help their players get into the first team, and for our players to go over there and get opportunities.
Gentlemen, thanks you both for taking the time. We appreciate it. I'll close with this. First, you, Oliver, you're maybe the highest ranking front-facing guy in this organization. James Keston took over 3 years ago. Since that time, new stadium. You guys have really pushed the envelope, and yet everything's on pause. What do you think 2020 looks like when we look back at it? Do you have any clarity?
Well, I think it will be a defining year, right? Hopefully we get to play some kind of season this year because everybody's worked really hard and the players are training really hard to come back. But I always said from day one, we build an organization that is not based on 1 year, that is built for a long term, right? And so again, we're spending a lot of time building really the structures and the fundamentals of our organization, and even in more details than we've already had. And you know what? We will weather this storm. Of course, it's a significant storm for everybody, but James has shown a tremendous amount of leadership by keeping everybody employed and finding ways for us to continue to go. We work every single day hard, and we want to build an organization again that will come back. And when we get the opportunity to come back, we want to be better than we were before.
Braeden?
I think, like I said, I mean, I think the most frustrating thing for me is I think that we have a team this year
Right.
from top to bottom. And it's just one of those things that we just have to keep waiting. And I think, just being in, the patience part is the one thing that's been the biggest challenge, is just be patient. When we get back out there, ultimately we're going to be able to perform. But, during this time, like Oliver said, as a club though, it's Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to take some time, but this time we're going to use wisely to help with a lot of the little tedious, jobs and the things that we need to clean up and we need to get better at, from top to bottom. And like Oliver and you said, I mean, it's not just Oliver and I mean, it's Franz, it's Peter, it's Richard, it's our whole organization, and we're all challenging each other to get better. And ultimately, making our club the best club that we can be in this country.
Braeden, Oliver, thanks for the time. You guys were great.
Thank you, Mike.
Mike, thank you very much. All the best of health to you as well. And we'll see each other on the field soon, all right?
Thanks, guys.